Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this month's TIBCO Analytics Meetup. Today, we're speaking about the data science lifecycle and providing a case study on dynamic pricing. I'm Michael O'Connell, and I'm joined by Colin Gray and Helene Snelting from the TIBCO Data Science team. The standard confidentiality and disclaimer slide. And here's the agenda. So I'm going to first kick it off with an update on TIBCO Analytics, the data science lifecycle that's in focus today. Colin's going to give a demonstration on dynamic pricing, and Helene's going to run the Q&A and give an update on the TIBCO community. So the data science lifecycle, we're going to be speaking about data management, feature engineering, modeling, deployment, model monitoring, rebasing, the full lifecycle as shown in this slide, the CRISP DM methodology: project definition, acquisition, exploration, data blending, feature generation, model baselining, refinement, model testing, deployment, model monitoring, refresh. That's the standard lifecycle. And across the left-hand side here is our interpretation of that in the different phases. And this is what we do with TIBCO Data Science. So the data access, preparation, exploratory data analysis, feature engineering, initial modeling. We start off in TIBCO Data Science Team Studio. This drag and drop interface here that is in the background. We also do a lot of the exploratory data analysis inside of TIBCO Spotfire, so back and forth between these two products. The personas here: data engineer, data scientist, citizen data scientist. Our data science tool includes a notebook so that you can drag onto the canvas, and it introspects the visual pieces to it. So it's definitely a hybrid visual composition and notebook environment with lots of connectivity into open source tooling, as well as our own native tooling. And then for inference, we have a separate product, TIBCO ModelOps, that we hand off from the data science environment. And this does model lifecycle management, monitoring, batch and real-time. Governance also provided in our data science tool is governance. And there's a bit of overlap here. The data science tool also does batch analysis, and you can publish models and so on. And then out on into the business app area, where once you have a model, how to put that into a customer analytics application or yield optimization, liquidity risk. And you see the personas changing a little bit as we go along from left to right here. And here's the personas in a little more detail. We use TIBCO Spotfire for business analysts, the notebook for data scientists, the point and click for citizen data scientists, the ML engineer can extend these products and create their own interfaces for different personas, and then publish out into a DevOps environment. The AI architect sets up some of those environments. I run a fairly big data science team, and we have all of these personas on the team who take the process all the way from business analyst through these other stages, and usually back to the business analyst, actually. And Colin's going to show you a little bit about how we, underneath the hood of our data science product, we have our data virtualization product serving as a data mesh for combining different domain and business line views on the data germane to the particular business problem, and how both our Team Studio Data Science and our Spotfire product can interoperate against those views provided by the data virtualization environment. And the publishing from data science into ModelOps, we'll show you that, and how that ModelOps offering then allows you to wire up your data science model to a new data source, whether it's a Kafka stream or a database, to do the inference step. So you'll see the combination then of our visual analytics environment, data science, streaming analytics, and ModelOps. And together we call the combination of these analytics products TIBCO's hyperconverged analytics. Now, as you kind of combine these in with the data fabric, the distributed data mesh that we're talking about, that comes together then into what we call connected intelligence, visual analytics and data science, both interoperating on our data virtualization, data mesh environment, and then publishing results out through ModelOps into the event stream. So that's the setup of what you're going to see today. Now I'm going to hand off to Colin to do a demonstration. Now, dynamic pricing is a fairly specialized area, especially in the insurance business. And the challenge here is that there's a lot of black boxes out there that are pretty slow to react to market trends and regulations and tactical sales campaigns. And so what we've been working on is this offline set of analytics where you can basically produce a machine learning model that estimates the probability of someone's going to accept an offer for a premium. And from that model, optimal price tables are set up for different microsegments, depending on how long someone's been with the company, the claims they've filed, the timeliness of their premium payments, and different business constraints around what target retention rates you want to have on those different microsegments. So that's all handled in the offline analysis. And then online, you put this into the event stream where someone comes in for a self-service policy. They're segmented into different groups. There's a discount set. Some randomization takes place there, so you can do post-processing with elasticity type models. And then a final quote is put in front of the prospect. Now, there's a fairly sophisticated set of algorithms going on underneath this, underwriting, conversion and capture, retention of the best customers, price optimizations to grow the business, and rapid reaction to the market. And so we're going to give you a flavor of this. Underneath this quote manager is a data science model. As the quotes are put out, someone fills in the form, they get a quote, they either accept or reject that. We save that quote and the acceptance rejection. And over time, we rebase a model that comes back and creates the quote. So there's kind of a circular loop here. We call it continuous intelligence, from model training to deployment on the event stream to rebasing. And then behind the scenes, we get a lot of visibility into who's accepting the quote, what's the profitability of the business. So there's a whole back-end visual analytics application on the accumulating data. But let me turn over to Colin, who's going to now walk us through the demonstration and basically instantiate what I just showed in TIBCO tooling for going through that process. So Colin, how are we doing?
Yeah, good. Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm going to take you through the demo and show you some of the actual technical aspects of this. We're going to run through, a Spotfire advanced analytics tool that will take us through the full data science lifecycle. But the, Spotfire acts, like Michael was saying, in this hyper-converged analytics. It acts almost like the cockpit for your plane, if you like. The engine and the power comes from the TIBCO Data Science, which pushes out models to Spark, but also TIBCO Data Virtualization, which allows us to read and write from any source. And that becomes a very powerful mechanism for doing production standard data science. And so hopefully that will come across with this demo about how that works and how you can then use visually driven data science to actually empower and make sure your business has got a suitable model. So I'll just share my screen just now, Michael, if that's good.
Sounds good.
1 second. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
Awesome. So this is a Spotfire tool, and I'll take you through the steps that we had up at the beginning. We're going to do the traditional steps and then end with deployment of our model into model ops. But it's really important to do the steps around exploring your data, learning about your data. So this is a tool designed that a pricing analyst could use, your business analyst type person, or they could be working with a data scientist. So they're going to be able to explore data and build models, but the power of the data science will actually be done by TIBCO Data Science, as I mentioned. So it allows data scientists and analysts to collaborate really closely so that they're working as a team. So first and foremost, we want to retrieve the data and actually learn about it before we delve into building our data science models. So what we can do here is we can actually pull the data into Spotfire. But one of the things particularly with finance and insurance, is that often they have millions upon millions of rows of data. So they'll have millions of historical record of policy quotes and rejections and renewals. And that's not really practical or feasible to pull into do analysis. And also you will experience things like data saturation where it's just repeating similar patterns. So what we're actually doing here is we're going to pull the data in direct from TIBCO Data Science instead. And that allows me to do a down sample. So I only pull out a random subset, but it will be representative of the data set in itself. So that allows us to control the amount of data. So for instance, if I just want to pull back 10% of my sample, I can type in 10 and create down sample. And what that's actually doing behind the scenes is that's triggering a TIBCO Data Science workflow and actually populating our database behind the scenes, which Spotfire will then read. So you might have noticed a quick flicker there, and that was actually the data updating. So I'll go into how that was happening behind the scenes in a little bit, but it's just really important that, you know, this helps someone analyze the data quickly, but also in a manageable manner. So you might have a small data set, then we could just ask for 100% of the data. But in my case, I'm going to ask for 70% and just create another downsample. So here we can see the data in question. We've got policies, we've got typical columns like claims, penalty point, vehicle value. We've got things about number of quotes, engine size, you know, all these types, demographic information, when they renewed, the mileage, etc. So what we're going to do is try and learn and explore that. And that's where we can use Spotfire to do that on this sample we've created. So we can step through this process. You know, Spotfire is great at building that sort of flow for you to follow so you can build up your knowledge. And here, for instance, we can look at the different types of variables, but in more detail. So we look at the response, and the response has been generated by Team Studio, and that's whether somebody has renewed in this dark gray or not. So that's a non-renewal, somebody rejected the quote. And in this sort of blue, we've got whether people renewed. And this allows us to look at the different categories. So we can look at, for instance, vehicle type. We can see how many people have a hatchback and how many of those renewed or not. And that helps us build patterns of what data do we have where we can see differentiation on that affect whether somebody renews or not. So you can easily explore all of this and compare all these things and determine what's important. You can also do this for numerical columns. So again, you can explore through this data. We can look at, for instance, a vehicle value, and this box plot again compares non-renewals to renewals. And if you compare the medians, it gives us a feel for whether they are able to differentiate between renewals or not. And this is a histogram of the distribution, again, comparing the average value. So we can see the vehicle value does seem to have some relation to whether somebody renews. And we might look at things like, you know, years with increment or invite premium, you know, things that might affect someone's decision. So we learn about the data, but of course, this can be time consuming and manual. So we want to bring in some data science quite early on. So what we can do is use a technique which is really called Predictor Importance. And here we can use a bit of data science to really rank and score each of our columns in our data or our predictors, and how strong they can actually predict the response, which is whether someone renews or not. So we've ran this predictor thing, and we can just click this button again. So we haven't needed to do any code. So as an analyst, I can run this without worrying about the code or the workflow that's generating that, because I trust the data science scientist has developed that. And now we can see the most important columns. So invite premium, you know, the cost that's been offered to the person to renew, obviously important, value, age of the person, mileage. And now we get a feel for what computationally is the most important. We've also got this analysis here where we can look at correlations. So you might have heavily correlated values, and that could be important to exclude these from a model, or to just learn about that. So for instance, we're using what's a network chart here to look at those relationships. And this is a mod in Spotfire, which we'll mention. So Spotfire allows custom visuals to be developed using a mod API. And this is a network chart we've developed and published that you can download. So if I use Spotfire's filtering here to filter down to only things that have a stronger correlation, we can now actually learn about how our premiums are working. So for instance, we can see that claims cost is closely related to claims in the previous year and claims count, as you would expect. And these are related to non-claim discounts, which are then connected to the premium that people have been asked to pay. But our premium is very heavily connected to vehicle value and someone's age. So that tells us straight away that we've got quite a strong correlation there, and that maybe is something we want to look at. Perhaps our method for generating premiums isn't ideal, or it's too heavily weighted. So just by doing these analyses, we can really learn about our own processes and the own data that we use for this type of work. But once we've done this exploration and we've really learned about our properties, we actually want to build a data science model. But before I do that, I want to go back to how we retrieved this data initially and just show you the workflow in Team Studio. So this all looked seamless. I didn't have to, as an analyst, worry about what was happening behind the scenes. I just need to know how to use this front end, this Spotfire analysis. But when I was clicking this button and it was running this process, what it's actually doing behind the scenes is going into Team Studio, which is our TIBCO Data Science tool. And this is our big data tool. So what you have is a project where I've got my pricing optimization project, and we have various workflows and objects that people can collaborate on and share. So in this case, I've got a data downsample workflow. And these workflows are drag and drop, low code or no code, and you can sort of build these up. So a data engineer could build this up. And so here we have our policy renewal data. So this is actually the connection to our database. And what it's doing is it's connecting through TIBCO data virtualization. So it allows us to connect to almost unlimited data sources, hundreds of data sources. So it could be an Amazon S3 bucket. It could be a Postgres database. It could be a flat file system. It could be a cloud database. And we can retrieve that data in and then do calculations and manipulations to it. So in this node here, which I can just double click and change the values, alter sort of the parameters. That's generating a downsample. We're then taking those sample policies, we're adding that response. And the real important flow at the end here is we're writing that back to a database. And here we can pick what schema we write it back to. And notice it doesn't ask me about what database, because actually it can write to any database because of this TIBCO data virtualization layer that's really powering this. So for instance, this data set is local, is actually writing to a file system, whereas this pricing one that I'm using here is writing to Postgres. And you can do it as a view or a table. So that's really important, because what we can do then is run this, populate a database, and any other tool or system can react to that new data that's been populated when we run this workflow. And as we said, this is really easy drag and drop if you want to manipulate it. There's no code involved here, and you can easily just configure and change this as a data scientist or engineer. So when I clicked that button, that was what was happening behind the scenes to generate this downsample for us to actually explore the data. So let's jump on to the data science, the really interesting and exciting part. We've learned about our data, we've generated that downsample, but now we want to actually build the models to predict whether somebody's going to renew or not. So again, we come in here and we can look at the model types we've got here, which is these 3 model types. And then it's as simple as click build models. So if I click this, again, it's going to call out to our Team Studio, and it's going to do all the work for me. So again, as an analyst, I just need to run that and wait for the results to come in. And when they do come in, all these properties and all these graphs will update. Now I'm just going to stop that from running, because obviously these data science models take a few minutes to run, and we don't want to wait while that runs. But just to say that when that has been pushed into Team TIBCO Data Science, the models are actually being built in Spark. So again, using data virtualization, it pushes that computation out to Spark. And that gives us a very high power clustered enterprise standard way of running data science. So when you get the models back, we generate ROC curves, because this is a classification problem. We're trying to work out whether somebody renews or not. And we can tell which models are better. So we've got our random forest, we've got a gradient boosted tree, and we've got our logistic regression. Here you can see the boosted tree doesn't quite have as nice a ROC curve, whereas the other 2 are very close. We generate some stats about accuracy and F measures and how they perform per category. So are they good at predicting no renewals or policy renewed, and are they good overall? So that is really quick and easy for someone to explore. But what we can also do is really optimize those models. So one of the things is you can look at simple metrics like F measure or accuracy or R squared if it's a regression. But using a tool like Spotfire with Team Studio, you can delve into the model and really understand how that model is working and thinking. And that's crucial to really start understanding if the model's suitable for your business. Because when you put this into production, you need to understand how it will behave in certain scenarios. Does it have biases? Does it have errors in it? Is it behaving the way you want it to do? So what we can do here is there's a lot of information here, but it allows us to really explore in detail what the model's doing. This chart here shows us the spread of probabilities and whether the policy was renewed or not. So when we predict a policy renewal, it gives it a score of 0 to 1. 1 being the model thinks it's definitely a renewal, 0 thinks it's definitely a not renewal. And you can see in the dark grey and blue whether that's in fact right or wrong. So now we can see the gradient boosted tree has quite a steep curve here where it thinks all these are renewed. It's confident about those, and it's actually correct. And it's also correct here. The rate, and you get a slightly different profile for the regression model here, the logistic model, sorry, and then you've got one for the random forest. But we can look at the confusion matrix. So the blue is right, the correct answer. So you can see, for instance, there's 63% of correct predictions from the logistic regression model, which shows it got the policy renewed predictions correct. Here we've got 17% of the non-renewals of the whole data set are correct as well. So overall, it's got an accuracy of 80%. So that's pretty good. But we can see it's missed quite a few where the actual result was not a renewal and the model has predicted policy renewed. So those are wrong predictions. And here we see the other side as well, where it predicted a non-renewal, but actually the result of reality was that the person did renew. So these are quite reasonable, and we can compare the models. And what we can also do, for instance, is change the cutoff for what the model considers a renew or not. So traditionally, everybody just takes 0.5. So if it's below 0.5, it's a non-renewal. Above 0.5, it's a renewal. But actually, when you look at this spread of data, you might want to change that and say, well, what if we set the model to cut off and say anything above 0.4 is a renewal? How does that affect our statistics? So that's really important, because you might want to say, let's push the model to be more favorable to catching renewals. Or you might say, well, actually, I'm more interested in predicting non-renewals, right? So let's push that probability in the opposite direction. We can also change how we view this chart. You can see this is showing a scale, and we can see the number, but actually you can also use Spotfire to change that model. And now if we're using 100% stacked bar chart, and that helps us see the spread of non-renewals to renewals at each probability bracket. So here you can see the random forest is a really nice sort of area of non-renewals below our bar of 0.5, whereas the boosted trees tends to do a lot of incorrect renewals here, where it's predicting renewed incorrectly. So that's really powerful. So what we can do with Spotfire is, again, we're calling out to TIBCO Team Studio, and we can actually set all these things where we can change how the model runs, we can reconfigure it. And what we can do is even run a grid search where the model produces multiple random forests, but using different parameters to explore. So what's actually happening there in Team Studio, if I go back, is when we run that model, we're actually building, running this workflow. So this model actually is running because I triggered it from Spotfire, so I'll just stop that. But here you can see we've got pulling the data in. We can do things like null value replacements. We can add features. We can filter out columns that we shouldn't be using in a model. And ultimately, we then build these three models. And what happens is all these inputs and configuration of the model are passed to actually from our Spotfire tool. So when I click the button to build the models, we're building all of this. And the great thing is it's exporting that model into Spark, and it's also putting the model results of the predictions into a database. And again, that database can be read by Spotfire, and that's how I'm showing all these model optimizations and analysis. We can even do an undersample. So for instance, when you have a biased data set, like we do, where most people renew, you can actually say, well, let's test doing an undersample of 50%. And that basically tells Team Studio to ignore 50% of the renewal data and try and build a more balanced model. And when you do that, you then get a different set of outputs, a different set of results that you can then compare and look at. So this gives us a lot of detail. It's quite a lot happening on the screen, but that's really what you need to understand a model fully to put it into production. So the final stage is when you're happy, when you're ready with your model. And what I've concluded from my analysis here is that the random forest is the best model from the performance. It gets good overall accuracy, and it handles with low error rate. So what I want to do then is finally deploy that model. And what we can do now is just one last step in Spotfire, again, that your analyst and your business expert can use. And they just pick the model. and they see the data that's left over and they click deploy. And again, like all the others, behind the scenes, what that is doing is using one final Team Studio workflow where it loads that model in that was previously built and deploys it to model ops. And then it's ready to be run in real time and used in your production and your business and used it for real-time quotes. So at that stage, I will stop and hand back to Michael to end the story about once it's deployed to model ops.
Yeah, terrific. What a great analysis, Colin. I really enjoyed that flexibility you showed there. And, if the cost of a false positive and false negative are a little different, you can incorporate that into some of those sliders that you were showing as you change the various thresholds. So, yeah, really awesome job. So now we're in the part of monitoring and managing that model that Colin built, in real time. And so what happens here is you're wiring up the model that Colin built, the input parameters, to the new data channels that you want to do the inference on. So that could be a at-rest data set, or it could be a Kafka stream, whatever you want to map the data channel that you want to apply the model to, the parameters of Colin's model. So the input can be a real-time data source from a customer policy application. And then you want to score the data, for example, predict on that new data with the model that Colin built. The derived data are important. Decision tables, quotes, premiums, what you actually put out there as a quote to the person to maximize their chance of accepting. And then putting the output. In this case, we're going to do a Kafka stream in and a Kafka stream out as we predict on the event stream. And then visual analytics behind the scenes then on what's been working, what the profitability by region and so on, who's accepting the offers. So here you now see that dynamic pricing model that Colin created. It's now inside of TIBCO Model Ops. And I'm going to run a quick video to show you how all of this works. So you see now that the mapping of Colin's parameters happen in the input, the scoring piece, the application of the model. That Python piece does the decision tables and then puts it out. So here's the data channel piece that's being mapped, the inputs of the new data coming in to the model, the scoring pipeline, then pushes out the predictions. And so now I'm getting the predictions as quotes by region on the left, over time, by age, by whatever factors you want to incorporate into understanding who's accepting and who's not. And then you can do analysis like the profitability or the commission win-loss, the discount, what's the effect of that on the win-loss rate. So basically a lot of business analytics you can also do on the event stream. Now, as that whole process is ongoing, we want to understand the model's applicability to the new data that's coming through. So we have some Spotfire analyses that keep track of the model drift, also the feature drift, the concept drift. The difference between concept and model drift is, one of them is the raw Y variable and one is the predicted Y variable. So you can track those and compare, say, for example, from the training set to the current set. You can see, how does the distribution compare? So we have things like a Kolmogorov, Smirnov test for difference in distributions to understand the drift, for example. And then, when it's time to rebase the model, we can base that on drift, or we can base that on our post-process analysis of profitability by region. We might want to run a new sales campaign. There's a number of times that we want to do the rebasing. Now, I call it rebasing because it includes the retraining, but it also includes updating the decision tables, the quotes, the discounts, the whole process. So it's bigger than just retraining, although the model does get retrained. There's a governance checks for regulatory compliance and so on. There's a lot of regulations, particularly in Europe, around how you can't discriminate between on gender or things like that when you're putting out a new insurance quote. And so when we run the model again on the accumulated data, we'll then do a champion challenger bake-off between the new model and the existing model. And then we're able to just basically go around this loop where we've got historical data coming in, we're building a model, we're deploying that in real time and looking at that on real-time data. But as the data accumulate, we can remodel, rebase the model, compare the new model to the current model, approve that and put that into real time. So this whole process we call continuous analytics, all the way from soup to nuts here, right? We've taken you all the way from the raw data now into this model that's deployed, on the event stream. So that's the insurance pricing example, showing the full end-to-end data science lifecycle. And now I'll turn it over to Helene to tell us, to run the Q&A, but also tell us what some of the exciting updates are for TIBCO Spotfire, TIBCO Data Science, and the rest of our connected intelligence portfolio. So Helene, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Michael and Colin. So yes, in interest of time, some quick updates on our community links that are related to everything that you learned today. First of all, we have our quarterly newsletter that everyone can sign up for, which will always invite you to the next quarterly meetup. So please sign up for that one and be informed on the next meetups. We also have some pages on the TIBCO community that are really of interest, that explain some of the technology behind the demo that you saw today. So there's a What's New page for TIBCO Data Science Team Studio that goes into the details of the integration between TIBCO Data Science and TDV, TIBCO Data Virtualization. And also you can download the Dynamic Pricing Accelerator, which is really a fast start of the solution that you just saw. And the other thing I also wanted to mention is, and Colin actually used one of those in the demo. There are a lot of new Spotfire mods available on the TIBCO community as well. You can access them from GitHub and from the TIBCO website as well. And these are extensions to TIBCO Spotfire that are visualizations that add to the palette of visualizations that are already part of TIBCO Spotfire. And there's been a lot of development there. I think there's a total of 21 now on the TIBCO Community Exchange that you can download. Lots of them frequently requested and now frequently used. So please take a look at that on the TIBCO Community Exchange. Also wanted to encourage you to sign up for the 2 YouTube channels, TIBCO Data Science as well as TIBCO Spotfire. That's where we'll share, tips and tricks videos, these videos, Dr. Spotfire, Dr. Data Science. So if you like, visual consumption of these type of learnings, then those channels are really useful to subscribe to. And last but not least, we have just started planning our TIBCO Analytics Forum of 2022. So really excited about this. We are just gathering interest for speakers and building the agenda. So if you're interested in speaking, please get in touch with Michael, Colin, or myself. And if you're interested in attending for training for these great breakouts and keynotes, then save the date and put June 13th through 16th in your calendars. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let's just go to some of the questions that we've received.
Yeah, I typed some answers to some of them, Helene, but I think we can also discuss them. Caroline Kaffenkol asked a question about applications of dynamic pricing. We've done an insurance example here today, but yeah, dynamic pricing is pretty much everywhere. If you would go to make travel plans, or a lot of times you'll go onto an interactive website and you'll be given a price, and you have to decide whether to take that or compare that to other vendors. So yeah, we see that in the travel industry. Whenever you're getting a quote. So I think the technology is pretty broadly applicable in the customer analytics world, but I'd refer it off to Helene and Colin to have any other commentary on that.
Yeah, there's one use case that is quite interesting as well, as you can go beyond just the quotes. So the probabilities are great for the renewals and learning, but it actually then goes into marketing, because you can segment based upon the probability of someone renewing. You might target a group with a different marketing campaign, so it becomes almost like a retail question where you can say, let's make an offer to those with low probability, or let's really ensure we keep the high probability customers. So you can apply that in lots of places. So anyway, you can sort of generate this probability. You can then sort of use that as a marketing tool or an offers tool as well. So I think it's got a really wide range of use cases. Absolutely.
When you're looking at customer analytics, you want to understand their frequency, recency of purchase, their dollar spend. It's a number of factors that go into how you approach a customer with a certain offer. I know we've been doing quite a bit of work on that in the TIBCO, right, Helene and Colin?
Right, yeah. I was going to say, and also I think in the current times, there's more and more data available to make those models more accurate as well with automation, and especially during the pandemic, a lot more customers are online doing purchases and leaving data to help with understanding how they make their purchase decisions. So it's easier to segment and to make recommendations that are, you know, of interest to specific segments of customers.
Yeah.
And we had another couple of questions that came in around Spotfire and the combination of Spotfire with our data science product. I think we showed that off quite a lot today. And that whole notion, I had a Venn diagram up there and so on one of my slides about how the combination of data science, Spotfire with our underlying data sources, how that comes together. And we call it hyper-converged analytics, but then deploying the model on the event stream with real-time data, brings in that whole streaming component and the whole continuous analytics piece. So we're definitely investing in all of our products as they come together for solutions like the one you saw today. But hey, look, I think we had a good crowd and a fun presentation. Helene, Colin, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I just saw one final question, but there's actually more coming in. So maybe one final remark is that we will make this presentation available on the TIBCO community as well as on YouTube. And if you registered for this webinar, you'll be sent a link so that you can access this. And we'll make sure to follow up with anyone who's still posting questions. I know we've run a little bit over, but thank you for everyone who attended. And thank you, Colin and Michael, for the presentation.
Absolutely. And the analytics forum I saw come up in one comment. So yes, we are going to have the analytics forum in the middle of June. Helene had a slide on save the date for that. Yeah, we'll be there with bells on, obviously, again, for another great analytics forum. I think it's the middle of June, June the 13th, the 15th. So, right. Be online as, and so, yeah, you can attend. We'd love to have you. Okay.
See you there.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone, cheers.
All the best. Yeah, cheers. Bye-bye.